Welcome back, everyone. Zeb here, just returned from the supermarket after 2 years, and I'm going to be trying new content. So we're going to do this kind of in a podcast type of content. I have my good friend Alex here to introduce us today's topic. So let's start. Alex?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay,
What's up?
good. So the reason we're here today is to talk about one of the most reoccurring topics when it comes to anime and game localizations, which is bad translations. In specific, we're talking about a game that was just recently announced, which is Unicorn Overlord, from a famous Japanese brand, which is called Vanillaware, and they've been making games for about 2 decades now. So their games span back, I think, up to the PlayStation 2. I think maybe PlayStation 1, but I think the oldest one you can find is like Odin's. And the biggest issue that people have been seeing, and just recently the demo came out for the Nintendo Switch, and people have noticed that there have been some glaring issues with the translation. So I don't know if you can look at the article that I sent you.
Yeah, sure. Let me open it up here.
Yeah. So one of the biggest issues that I've been seeing here, and this is like a famous brand, and
Okay, I think you can see the article now.
Yeah, I can see the article. And people have been looking at the translation, and people have become worried because, when you look at the translations, like when you just look at them out of context, it doesn't look that bad. Like I have a bad feeling about this. There's nothing wrong with that. If you look at some of the translations, like casting the gauntlet at Renault's feet would only send us all to an early grave. Yeah, but when you start looking at more character interactions like this one that you're looking for, it starts to paint a bad picture, which is
we completely fell for it, and then the translation guy laid out the bait, and we just had to take it. Why?
Yeah,
why? Like
so
you have double the words.
Yeah, and it's not just that. It's not just because there's more words. It's also because some of these characters change the personality entirely. If you look at some of the other images, the women are a lot more, condescending about the things they're saying. Like you can read those.
Joseph, I leave the rest to you. And then on the translation, my fate and more lies with you, Joseph. I only pray it is enough. Yeah, I'm starting to notice the problem.
Yeah. And
Farewell.
the one below too.
Farewell, and may the heavens guide you.
Yeah, but it changes in my opinion, it changes the way you're speaking, the way you're reading this. When you just say farewell with the dots in front of it,
yeah,
it just shows that she's fearing for the future. She's unsure of what will happen. But on the translation, It seems like she's a lot more sure. Like she's not having those many doubts about what's about to happen.
It's like the normal thing that you see, especially in anime, the characters saying, especially like the most religious characters, like farewell and may the heavens, or usually may the gods be with you. But it doesn't exactly show uncertainty.
Yeah, there's not a shred of uncertainty on those words. It feels like she's very certain of what's about to happen. And there are more examples like below that. You can see a bunch of dialogue.
No, it's nothing. What is it? Now I'm curious. Are you sure anxiety will be the death of you if you keep it bottled up like that? It's just our lives that changed so drastically from the peace we had only yesterday. It barely seems real. I can't say I feel any different. It does feel that way. Wait, so the ones on the right are like just...
Yeah, those are the actual translations that you're getting in the game.
Okay.
Yeah, the one in the middle is missing. Like, there's not a translation, like a direct translation from the one in the middle. I'm assuming it's about the same. Mm-hmm. But the introductory sentence and the final sentence of this dialogue, it changes slightly the way the characters are speaking and interacting with each other. And you're going to see a lot of these themes.
Yeah, I even got a bit confused reading this because, again, you have like a simple sentence on the left. Mm-hmm. What is it? Now I'm curious. And then, are you sure anxiety will be the death of you if you keep it bottled up like that? Why so much text? Like, it read nothing.
Yeah, unless the translators are paid by word, which I don't think they are.
Exactly.
Yeah, which, I don't think they are. And I think the the biggest issue that people have with this is that it changes the context, it changes the personality of the characters themselves. It caters a lot more to a Western audience for no reason, because I mean, Vanillaware are famous, but they're a relatively niche brand, right? Like you didn't even know about them.
Yeah, I didn't know
I told you
about
this.
For this. Yeah.
And above all else, it's the death of the artistic integrity, because it's not the original vision that whoever did this did it for.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah, you can see it even more in the next translation, like the one on the right, the one you're looking at. Yeah, that one. Yeah.
No, get away. Get your vile claws off of me. Let her go. What business again? What business could you have with Scarlet and hand her this instant? It might not seem much, but it does change like the character. If you're only saying 3 words in the original, it might be a character that doesn't talk much, and then you have like super giant dialogues.
Yeah,
like, super necessary.
Yeah, keep going, keep reading those.
Emperor Galerius considers this girl to be necessary. No, I don't think that will be happening. I act under orders from Emperor Galerius himself. Yeah, but on the right, you're not telling that she's important to the Emperor. What he plans to do with her, it's not my place to know. As for what he plans to do with her, that's not for one of my agent.
That's about the same. Yeah, that's about the same. I don't think that's that. But I think the biggest issue is that one of them implies that the girl might be important, and the direct translation shows that she's explicitly important. Like she's the reason he's doing this. It's the entire reason of his actions.
Yeah, like that's completely missing from the translation on the right.
And I think if you think that the words are so to say power, you will assume that the words that you're using are important. So even if you say, well, it's just a slight change, well, it's still a slight change from the original artistic idea behind it.
Yeah, it is. Sorry, but I'll be taking the girl, yet I shall see it done all the same. I guess, but it kind of doesn't have anything to do with the one on the left, you know?
Yeah, it's pretty different. And again, it's one of those situations where you might say, well, Japanese doesn't translate directly from Japanese to English or to other languages. But the issue is, as you see here, like you could have done a pretty literal translation and still get something very close to the original.
Exactly.
I think one of the main issues behind this is that the game only released as a demo as of now. So people have no idea how many changes will be in the game.
Yeah, when I see these kinds of changes on a demo, I really get worried with the final product.
Yeah, because we've had translations from certain games having issues like the change of translation changes the entire meaning behind character intentions, the powers that some characters have, the entire lore behind the world. They can be big changes.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen countless examples like that, and when you start changing like the most basic things, all these small things, you can only assume, okay, they're going to make a lot of big changes on the translations of the final product, because they're feeling the necessity to interpret everything. They're not so much as translating, they feel like they have to reinterpret it for the English audience.
Yeah, for the Western audience, because
exactly.
You know, we're used for the Japanese to be pretty wild with the things they write, right? And a lot of people don't like that, and that's fair. Like, I think it's pretty fair that you don't like some of the things that the Japanese write in their games and explain in their games or show in their games. But when you're talking about something this literal, where there's no need to change the context of this, and they still do it, why? Why would they do this?
Are you worrying about Scarlet? All that worrying's gonna kill you one of these days. Let me guess, it's about Scarlet. That kind of changes the character and the intentions about it. It sounds more like a taunt on the one on the right.
Yeah, it's maybe a taunt, or maybe like playing around with the idea instead of asking a serious question person to person, you know?
I can't hide anything from you, huh? I couldn't pretend otherwise. It's sniff out alive for its scars past my lips. And then again, like all of these added things, they're kind of necessary.
Yeah, and it also, like for example, if you're just thinking mainly about an English audience, it feels like this is very American centric, because, or at least like English language centric, because when you're looking at, if you're thinking about other people that might play your game in English but might not know English, it's a lot easier to understand the ones on the left, the original translation, than the one on the right. You're adding a lot of unnecessary complexity. And that's never good. You never want that in your text. There's a lot of complaints. I've heard complaints about this as well because of the fact that a lot of ancient English language is being used on this demo as well. And it makes, even for English audience, it becomes harder to read and to understand the intentions behind it.
Ancient English language?
Yeah, there's some more like old or something like that, like words that are not very common to be used nowadays. I don't think they show a lot of that in the examples that I sent you, but it's something that I heard about when it comes to the demo. Like this is slightly extensive, but there are more examples of this than the ones that are shown here.
Of course.
It's always problematic because, you know, I like Final Fantasy XIV, for example, and a lot of people complain about the translations there because they're unnecessarily complex. It doesn't necessarily change the tone of the game that much, but there are some glaring changes. And even when it comes to the dub, which is always like a point of contingency, right? People are always complain about dubs as much as they do about subs. And when you're talking about dubs, it changes completely. Like you might have a character, for example, there's a specific character which is a Lalafell, which is like a midget. And she's a girl, and she has like a very, you know, like very cheerful anime voice in the original Japanese version. But when it comes to the English version, the voice, the same character, has the voice of like a British teacher, like a deep British teacher voice, like the most generic British voice you can imagine, a deep one. And you can imagine, like, when you're talking about a character that's literally a midget that's supposed to be cheerful, it changes the context entirely.
Yeah,
like,
it's fun just to imagine that.
It's not even the same character.
A British midget.
Yeah.
A teacher. Okay. Yeah, it's pretty
it
funny.
Changes everything. And it's just one more of those things that start to make people question, like, at what point are the Japanese, socially, so to speak, accepted for using automated translation methods like AIs? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that talk has been coming up a lot. And I believe there have been a couple of instances where the Japanese have already used AI translations. Like, I believe the latest Yakuza game.
The latest Yakuza game used AI?
Yeah, the Infinite Wealth, I think that's the one, the last one that came out. I believe it uses direct AI translation for the dialogue without voices. So the one that's not dubbed.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if you know this. In the games, you have a lot of dubbed cutscenes, but then you have small moments when you're just interacting with smaller NPCs, and they don't necessarily speak out. So they might just have a small interaction. Maybe it's a side story. There's not a lot.
I do have an idea about the game, even though I haven't played the Yakuza games yet. I've already seen a bit of gameplay.
Yeah, and what happens about that? A lot of those subs have been made directly through AI translation. And the meaning behind the words is a lot more literal, close to the Japanese one. Some people have actually complained about this because some of the meaning has been translated directly to have the Japanese words written in Romanji, like in alphabetic ways. So if you're not deep within the lore of Japan and within the Yakuza series, you might not even get the joke at all. But there's not a direct way to translate that.
Yeah, that happens a lot with some English terms. Some of the things that they put on games and the anime, they don't translate as well. But you have a few options to translate that. Usually, the worst option is chosen. Like for anime, like they decide, okay, let's completely reinterpret this for the Western audience.
It changes a lot, like especially when it comes like. And there are some good changes, right? For example, when you have games where you might have characters of questionable age doing questionable things, and they up the age of the characters in the translation, maybe that's not such a bad thing when they're changing the lore to fit more with something that would be more acceptable outside of Japan. Because,
of course,
I think a lot of those things are just weird, right? So it makes some sense to change some of the ages. But when it comes to character progression, like the way the character is meant to be, I think that's a big problem. you're not getting the original context.
One of the examples that comes to mind, it's from Fate. You probably already seen the meme, people die when they are killed, right?
Yes.
Probably already seen that meme. That's
many times.
That's actually a direct translation, because the Japanese have a saying which goes like, that man wouldn't even die if he was killed. They have a saying like this, and this is basically kind of picking up that saying, but the opposite. And it's actually the right translation, but most people won't get that.
Yeah, I think
and so the meme about it.
Yeah, I think like 99% of people would not understand that.
Yeah.
But I think that's a case of bad translation, right? Because when you keep the original context that much, where it becomes incomprehensible what you're saying, I think that's a bad translation. It just is, because at that point you're not translating anything. You might as well just show the Japanese text.
I mean, more or less in that context, it actually made sense on the context of the whole thing. People like to pick it out of context, but it kind of made sense. But it's not the worst example.
Yeah, it's not for sure. There are millions of bad examples. Ys 8 is probably one of the best games Falcom has ever made. Falcom is the company that it's the developers of the Ys series. And without a doubt, the most complete and ambitious Ys title. However, we cannot get the full experience thanks to this abomination of a port. So people are complaining about the PC port of this game because it originally came out for the PS4, I believe. Which came with a myriad of bugs and crashes, most of which aren't fixed yet. Coupled with Nice America, mediocre and inconsistent translation. So this is still a problem. It has been posted in 2018, so I don't even believe this game had a good translation. And you can see below that video, you can see a couple of images about how bad the translation is. So this place is called the Archaeozoic
Big Hole.
Yeah, the big hole. And you can see below that, you can see a few examples of how bad that reads into dialogue.
That might be an important location for Dana. What?
Yeah,
what in the hell?
Yeah.
Do something about it. If I am ever in need of assistance, what do they mean by that?
Yeah, what did they mean by this? This was translated by people, not by AI.
Okay, my name is Alison. Please just call me Alison. It seems like she's not sure of what her name is.
Yeah, probably the people in this translation.
Okay, my name is Alison. Please just call me Alison.
I think like the NPCs were made to have brain damage in this translation. I think it's the real autistic version of the game. But it becomes a problem because in this case it's just a bad translation. Like the words are not correct, simple as. But I think it becomes an issue, and I think the reason people are worried about Unicorn Overlord is that we've seen a lot of translation being made to cater to a specific audience. I'm not taking sides here, but you see a lot of people complaining, for example, when there's a woman in a game that is, in the Japanese version, is just a regular woman, but it's suddenly made a lot better and more stern in the translation. Or you get a lot of, slight hints at sexism and other things in the game, which I think are unnecessary unless they're part of the original story. Right?
Yeah, of course. Like at that point, you're just reinterpreting things.
Yeah, because I seriously think you can have topics like that in a game, and you can take them on in not a subtle way, but you can take them in a more tasteful way. I don't know. Have you ever played Elden Ring?
Elden Ring, not yet.
Well, there's a female character there that comes from a place where she's basically shunned for being a woman because it's a land of tribal people. Maybe not tribal, but they're barbaric in nature. And the women are not supposed to fight at all. And she witnessed a lot of atrocities being committed on women back in her land. And so she's the daughter of a great warrior, which becomes relevant later in the game. And she decides, fuck it, I'm a female warrior, but I'm going to go and I'm going to fight. And it becomes relevant. It's a tasteful way of approaching the sexism aspect,
Yeah,
I don't think that's an issue because it makes sense. It ties in with the story. And maybe it doesn't even need to make sense. Maybe it's just there because it builds the character. I think that's an issue, and it's not part of the original plans, and they still do it. You know what I mean?
That's pretty much what happens with many movies nowadays. Like you see many movies where they're just trying to have a female lead with no positive qualities whatsoever. All like the positive qualities, like super strong, perfect, and whatever, Amerisu, and no likable qualities. Let's say it like that.
Yeah, I don't know if you've watched any of the Star Wars Ahsoka series. Like if you've seen any of those episodes of that
I've
series.
seen a few things, and it was enough to not watch it.
Yeah, in my opinion, that's a bad way of approaching female characters, because they try to make the women so, in that series, they try to make them so independent and strong that it comes out as them being dumb. Like simply dumb, because they try to do everything themselves and they fail. And when you think about it, you can't attribute the failure of them to anyone else.
Yeah,
you know
pretty
what
much.
I mean? So they try to be strong.
They're already girl bosses.
Yeah, they're already girl bosses, but they remain girl bosses during the entire series. And you know, like the series has great characters, like Ahsoka for starters. I think she's a great character. She's strong, but she has she's really old at that point. She's like 30, well, not super old, but she's about what, like 40 years old in the series, maybe a bit more. She has many decades of experience of fighting, so she's obviously a strong woman, a strong
Ahsoka is a good character, but I won't exactly call her a good character on that series. But then again, I've only seen a few parts from it.
I've seen the first couple of episodes, and I think she's a pretty great character even there. I think the issue is with the other female protagonist, which is someone that comes from one of Disney's cartoons of Star Wars, which is already like something that goes like anything that goes past the Clone Wars is kind of doubtful. But in this case, this character is she's constantly throwing tantrums like she's a kid, because she doesn't want anyone to
I know which one you're talking about.
Even Ahsoka herself tries to teach her, like she tries to help her, and she just spends all the time complaining about it. Like she does not want to be told a thing. And I think that's when the issues start. And I think my big issue with this is that Japanese people usually, when they write games and they write stories, they don't usually put these many focal points. Like you have plenty of Japanese games where the main characters are female and people don't complain about it. You know what I mean?
One of my favorite ones, which is Tales of Berseria, the main character is a female character, and I love Velvet.
Goes back all the way to the original Nintendo, where you had the original Metroid game coming out, and it was a shock to the male player audience, because most of the people playing games back there were male, when they found out that the main character is a female.
Yeah, Samus.
Yeah, and it became a mark of the series, is that it's a strong female protagonist. And no one complained about that, because she's a cool character, right? She's not even that deep, right? She's not written to be very deep. She's just a strong person. That's about it. Like, no one has an issue with a strong woman. That's
exactly.
It becomes an issue when you have the original, like the new Star Wars movies, where the character can just do all kinds of lightsaber battles with no prior training, and that becomes an issue, right? Yeah,
she picks up lightsaber for the first time and defeats the one that's supposed at that time that was supposed to be the new big bad.
Yeah,
it's just ridiculous.
In the 7th episode, if I remember correctly, I've seen this movie many years ago, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. But she's been arrested by the new Empire, and she's in some kind of base in an Arctic planet, or what is it? Or is it like Death Star 2, something like that? And she mind controls the soldiers into releasing her. And she never thought this before. Like, there was no way for her to know that she could do this. She had never tried it before. She had never seen anyone else do it. And she suddenly just click, bam, she knows that she can do this.
Yeah, that scene was probably so bad that I don't even remember, to be honest.
She just turns to the soldier and goes like, release me. And I'm watching the movie and I'm thinking like, lol, she's going to fail at this, and it's going to be a moment to laugh about, like, you know, like she's trying to do something clever and it doesn't work. And it works. It works instantly. She doesn't even have to try that much. She goes, well, release me. Okay.
Like on episode 4, the one that did those kinds of things was Obi-Wan, which was already super old.
Yeah, he was super old.
It's one of the characters with the most experience of all, and then like 3 movies after, you have like a girl who discovers she has force powers for the first time, and
Obi-Wan isn't even that strong, right? He's not that strong of a character, so
more or less
personality.
It kind of depends on the lore that you take into account, but
Yeah, well, I'm talking about what you see in the 6 main movies, like the 6 original movies. Like, he's relatively strong as a person, as an individual. He has strong charisma and personality, but he's not that strong in the Force, right? Like, everyone assumes and accepts that, for example, Anakin is a lot stronger when it comes to the Force.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, but he has the experience.
He has the experience because he was taught by masters, and he was humble, and he went through all those experiences. He went through all the trouble. I mean, he saw the fall of the Republic, so all of those things. And he had a lot of time to think about it, to train, to meditate. So that's about it, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
What sometimes shocks me the most is that you can have some games that have fan translations, and sometimes the fan translations are better than the original.
The fans, when it comes to these kinds of things, they do a really good job. When it comes to translations, when it comes to mods, when you have a loving community of fans, they usually do an amazing job on these things, but usually they're not being paid for it. And the people that are being paid to translate are doing sometimes atrocious job. One of the examples that I know this the most is Fate Grand Order. Fate Grand Order had some of the most atrocious translations possible. And it's not like Fate is a new series or anything. It's a pretty big series. And they have translations like a character from the 18th century saying things like, "Hello, my homies." That's just cringe.
A lot of times you get into cringe territories with these translations. It's just unavoidable.
Yeah, exactly.
But then there's some things that are quite funny. Like, I sent you like a link which is about the translation of Tales of Fantasia. Yeah, that one is pretty funny because when you look at it, like some of the this is a fan translation just for context. Yeah.
Like a tiger seen in Tales of Fantasia. Yeah, I know Tales of Fantasia. Never played it, but I know.
It was the first game in the Tales series. Unfortunately, it only came out in Japan at the time. Eventually, I think there was a PS1 port and there was a Game Boy Advance port. And I don't know if there have been more. I think maybe there has been maybe one more for the DS. I might be wrong on that. But there was no original translation for this, for the Super Nintendo. What happened is some people have picked up the ROM, and this is meant to be played on an emulator, obviously. And what they've done is that they decided to put their own twist on it. So there's a character you can see in that image. There's Clark, and Clark is like a mage. Go ahead.
Mint has that quiet elegance about her, but I bet Ark F's like a tiger.
Yeah,
what do they mean by that?
This guy, he uses books to fight. Like he's like a sorcerer. He casts spells through his book, and occasionally you can find some books in the game that are meaningless. Like they don't do a lot of damage compared to the regular books. What are they in the translation? They're pornographic magazines. It just says porno mag on the image.
Oh my god.
Yeah, it's hilarious. And I've played through this entire game, and you're not losing any of the context of the original, but the dialogue has been put up to 100. It becomes just that much better. Now, you can say that that's a bad translation, obviously, because it changes a lot of the context of the original characters. On the other side, it is a fan translation, so they're not up high to the standards of a translation team that's being paid to do this.
True.
And this creates a lot of funny moments in the community because some people play the original, or maybe they play the PS1 port or the Game Boy Advance port, and they like the story, and then they go back and play the Super Nintendo and they have a laugh at it. Because it's just, hilarious.
Do me a favor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
you can see here that Archie is just throwing herself at the sea lad.
Okay. So it kind of has some context. Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of cringe because she's 17 and she's doing that. Like, she's offering that. But obviously, like, even the pirate is like, no way, you're too young for that. What are you doing? But, it adds a lot of fun, like a lot of hilarious moments where characters say things that you're never expecting for people to say in the game. Like, I know that there's a scene there's a scene when they reach the next town from this cutscene where if you knock on one of the doors, you can read the dialogue, and it says that a woman is screaming like, "Oh no, here comes my husband," and there's some unknown man inside, and he's like, "Oh no, not again, I have to put my pants up."
Okay, so at first look, I won't imagine. Okay, this is probably completely different from the context. It's kind of still in context.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a little bit of there's a little bit of romance play here, even within the original game. Like they're going like, oh, do you like this girl, or are you boyfriend and girlfriend? But in the fan translation, it's a lot more explicit about what they're trying to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously, you'd never get a game published in the Super Nintendo with the F word on it. Like that, that would be crazy. Because all of these things used to be reviewed by Nintendo themselves. Like they would never allow this to be published. And you can imagine, like in America, in Europe, especially with the German, everything that went to Europe on the Super Nintendo had to go through German filters. Because since most of the games would enter Europe through Germany at that time, they would always be filtered in Germany and then be adapted to the rest of the countries in Europe. But most of them would just keep the original German adaptation. So a lot of these things would never go through. They would never be approved. And you can see like that game is just, there's nothing very explicit about it. It's just two people fighting aliens from outer space.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the issue with that is there used to be a law in Germany that you couldn't have humans
fighting aliens?
Humans using firearms and getting killed, because essentially, since they're humans, they get shot by the aliens, they die, and that goes against the rules that they had at the time for games. So what they did was they did something really cool. Actually, this is one case of localization where I do not complain. Instead, they changed the title and they changed the game. What they did was they replaced the human characters with robots. They altered all the artwork in the game to have robots instead of humans. Like you can see the cover. I had this game physically.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
so since you can't have humans dying, you can have robots dying.
Yeah, that's how they went around it. But it's actually pretty cool, as you can see. Like I personally, maybe it's because I grew up on these, but I prefer the robots to the humans.
That's fair.
I'm pretty sure if you played the original, you're probably going to like the humans more, obviously, because they have names and they have stories behind these things. Yeah, that's about it. I think it was a great change. I won't complain about that. The big differentiation in China, and I might be wrong about this too, so correct me if I'm wrong, but the main issue in China is protectionism. So you have a lot of games in China where people die. Like if you look up on Steam, you can see a bunch of games that weren't even tried to be translated properly from Chinese to English. Most of them just went to an AI translation. What happens is that those games, they have skeletons, they have zombies. That's not an issue. It's an issue when you're a company from the outside, like from America, trying to publish a game in China. That's the big issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why a game like World of Warcraft, which is so famous, had a lot of issues with trying to publish the game in China. And they even recently, I believe, they stopped publishing the game in China because of some legal issues, like financial issues and stuff, because they needed a partner to publish the World of Warcraft game, and they lost that partnership because of some internal conflicts of values. But they had to change a lot of things for the WoW. Yeah, but I think in China, for example, there's an entire race of zombies in the game, like the undead, and they were changed to skeletons because it's less explicit than the zombies themselves. Because most of the zombies have like parts of the body that are falling apart. Like some of them don't even have a jaw. And they just changed it to the skeleton.
Yeah, like in this example, it's the opposite, right?
Yeah, in this
like
example,
in the first one, the Chinese version is the one on the right.
Yes, that's the one that is
the one on the right. Okay, but here it's the opposite.
Yeah, it's confusing. That's what I'm saying. It comes down to the personal preference.
Here, the Chinese one is the one on the left, or
yes, it's the one on the left.
So
yeah,
again,
so it's all about
they're hiding the bones and all that.
Yeah, exactly. They're trying to make it as less explicit as possible. Again, I think it's all about making it more difficult for the Western companies to publish games in those countries, Like, obviously, you couldn't have, for example, a game in China being published that would talk that much about, like, an authoritarian system that would somehow depict something close to what China has.
Of course.
That would be an issue for China. They would definitely not approve something like that. And I think that's where a lot of these things come from. They're trying to protect their own brands, and they're also trying to protect their own propaganda.
Girls Frontline must be on their list. They must be on their watch list.
But isn't Girls Frontline published by China? Like, isn't it a Chinese company?
Yes.
So how can they get through with some of these things?
Yeah, I know, right? Like I'm saying, they must be on their watch list, because, like other games, the CCP gets to the company and says, yeah, you need to censor this, and they go overboard, and they're like, yes, we will censor all this, and we will even censor the English version. We will censor all this. Like, perfect example is Genshin Impact. Like, even Amber, look at this. Like, why?
Yeah, I can barely even understand what the censorship changes. Like, it feels a little bit less cleavage. That's about it, right? Is there anything else I'm not seeing?
There's not that much. It's kind of the cleavage and maybe on the back a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah, but again, like Genshin Impact is a Chinese company, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So even then, they get away with a lot of things that companies from the outside couldn't. You know what I mean?
And like, Mona's censorship is super confused because she's showing more skin on the left. But
yeah,
okay, yeah, they censored the tights. Yeah,
sure. That's sad. You should never censor the ties.
That is sad.
Like, the ties is the one thing you should not censor.
Exactly. There's a written rule about it, right?
There should be. If there's not,
there should be.
Yeah, if there's not, they should be like explicitly keep the ties on.
Like, the worst was Rosaria. This censorship on Rosaria goes beyond like censoring the general aspect of it. They're kind of also going against her character, because her character basically refused to use the official nun clothes. She basically hates it, and they basically covered her from head to toe in a classic nun outfit, which goes against her character. So it's pretty much to say that Genshin Impact does a lot of censorship, not only on their version. They basically translated this to the English version. Yes, you can have both versions, but they changed all the cutscenes to use the Chinese clothes, which is pretty stupid. Why would you change the English version? It makes no sense. Because Frontline did different things. So the CCP again got to them. Yeah, you got the censorship this, and they were like, we will censor this, but it would be a shame if there was a recipe that you can input on the game to get the non-censored version. I hope no one shares this recipe, you know?
Do you think it was like people from the inside sharing it? Or do you think it was data?
I think it was people from the inside, because they were super fine with it. They never stressed anything about it.
They never censored it. They never went back on it.
Never. Like, nowadays, like, the censorship is again applied on the English version, but everyone knows the uncensor codes. You can just input the codes, and it still works.
Yeah, and as far as I know, like, when you put in that recipe code, it doesn't just. It's not just a case where it changes the images. You literally download the images.
You download.
So they're not even in the game. Someone had to go purposely do that. And you can't even say it was for debugging reasons, because when you're debugging something, you already have that in the game, right? You're not going to download
it. Exactly.
So it doesn't make any sense that you download this.
Yeah.
There would be no reason to have code to download something that's just for testing purposes. You just do it directly. That's about it. Like, and then you remove it from the final release.
Yeah, exactly.
And obviously it is removed because it's not part of the game files until you put the recipe in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's the sassy part.
Like conversations about censorship, media manipulation, war, taking the power and all that. All the themes on the game go pretty close to that. Like, really, really, really touch that.
Yeah.
And I kind of wonder, how do they get away with it?
Yeah, I don't know, like, if there's some artistic freedom that you can have even in China, like, because obviously if you're trying to hide that there's propaganda, there shouldn't be an issue with you making something that talks about propaganda, right? Because
yeah, exactly.
As far as I know, the Chinese people are as much indoctrinated on this as we are, right? Because we get our own propaganda and we accept it.
Exactly.
And when we talk about China, we're like, oh, the Chinese have propaganda against us. And when you're in China, you're hearing the opposite. You're hearing like, oh, the Westerners, they have propaganda against China.
Yeah.
And that's not wrong, right? Because that's true.
Exactly.
That's exactly what happens, right? We hear a lot of things that might not be true about China. Yeah, it is a propaganda war. It's been that way since the Cold War.
Yeah.
And it won't change anytime soon, I'm sure of that. Like, unless there's a massive revolution in China and the Communist Party goes down. But I really doubt it, because the Chinese are very close to their Communist Party. I don't think it's something that they want.
As long as the common citizen is kind of fine, and that is everywhere. There won't come any change near.
Yeah,
Although,
that's like
if the economy starts doing bad, it's a possibility.
Yeah, and we saw that like in Hong Kong, a lot of people complaining about the authoritarianism of the mainland China.
Yeah.
That's something that does happen. And we do see even in Europe, we're talking about the American imperialism and now that's bad. So obviously there's a lot of propaganda on both sides about everyone.
Exactly.
So it is all about a question of what do you choose to believe in, and not so much what is the truth, because I believe the truth is something that is very hard to read.
It is.
Even if you think that you're very sure about something, it's very likely that you're wrong on some level about something.
The truth is probably somewhere in the middle.
My issue with translations as well is that you see a lot of, especially Americans, right? And this is an American-centric problem, which is you see a lot of translators trying to put in their own political messages into the games where they don't belong. And many times when they're faced with these accusations of them changing the context of the game to fit whatever they believe, they admit it. They admit it and they're proud of it. They're like, no, it's part of our job to also send our message in, because we're not just doing translation. We're also actively trying to change society, which is like, why? Why are you doing this? It's not your job.
Yeah, it's a game.
So,
I'm not playing the game to change society, you know?
Yeah, so
I play the game to have fun.
Exactly. And when, like, it also goes against most of people's jobs, right? Like, for example, if you work at a supermarket, you're not thinking about changing the politics of the people going through your store, right? You're just thinking, let me do my job, let me stock up the products, let me do the chores. And when you get home, the last thing that you want to do is someone else's job trying to tell you what you should think. Like when you're talking about that kind of thing, it always becomes a little fuss. Like, why would people want to do this? Because you already have messages in Japanese games, but most of those messages are more on a personal level. You know what I mean? They're more about your life. Like, what's your purpose?
Yeah, the Japanese do that pretty well.
Yeah, how do you go on? Where do you get your strength to continue when you're faced with the worst thing that you can imagine? You know, like your entire life has been brought to shambles. Maybe your family died. Maybe you don't even know who you are. Maybe you lost your own sense of self. And it touches on things like this very hard, where you might be on deep despair. It goes like, but you can still go on from this point. And I think those kind of messages are always welcomed, regardless of where you live in the world.
Yeah, they are, no doubt. You have many examples of animes and games that do that really well. Yeah,
because if you live in Japan, obviously there's a big epidemic of social dysfunctions in Japan. But even if you live in Europe, or you live in America, or you live in any place in Asia, you're always going to find relations with this kind of issue. Like, everyone goes through them at some point.
True.
So it's something that everyone can relate to. But if you're bringing like American issues into a game, and I'm an European and I'm playing it, I have no idea what do you mean by this. Like, what do you mean with, you know, any kind of social issue that you might have in America that we might not have over here? Like, what do you mean by this? This is not part of my reality. I have no context for this, and I don't want to have it.
Exactly.
I don't want to have the context for this.
And it has nothing to do with the game. In most cases, they're just pushing their own agenda. They're not even caring about the game's message anymore.
Yeah, it becomes a big issue when it comes to that. And when it comes to China, you don't see a lot of messages at all. Like, I think they're very confused. Like, even if you try to play a Chinese game, and I'm talking from experience, and I'm not mentioning Genshin Impact, but I'm not mentioning a lot of gacha games. I'm talking about like legit Chinese games. I've never seen any kind of message in a Chinese game. It's like, this is the story, go through with it. The absolute closest that you can get to propaganda in Chinese games is probably when it comes to traditionalism, when you're trying to pick like everything in China terms, when you're trying to make the country of China look great, super rich. They depict like a lot of historical figures. It brings a lot of historical context, you know?
And that's not exactly a bad thing. It's kind of normal that you try to push your culture, right?
Yeah, and probably you're not going to find a lot of Confucianism in Chinese games, because Confucius was very looked down upon by the Communist Party, like the teachings of Confucius, because they were very close to what you'd have in Europe, for example. And they're probably a lot closer to the individual than what they're used to. So you're not going to find a lot of Confucianism in Chinese games, that's for sure. I doubt that will go through censorship.
Yeah.
Again, you might find a lot more of a storyline that is more based around the people and not so much about your specific character. You know what I mean? You might find a lot more, and again, as I said, like, Confucianism is a form of philosophy that the Chinese do not appreciate in modern China because it goes against the topics of the Communist Party.
Of course, of course.
So obviously that's the kind of thing that you're not going to see in a game. So that's about as far as the censorship goes when it comes to ideas. I don't necessarily think that you can have like a bad authoritarian government, because when you look at China, when you look, for example, at America and Europe, and you look at it from the eyes of China, maybe they did say that we're an authoritarian country. We're in authoritarian countries. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That might be the message that's spread in. So it's all in the eyes of the beholder. Like, what do you consider authoritarian? And how bad is something authoritarian? Maybe authoritarianism is good for them. It's all about the order, you know, the peace.
That's kind of a hot take. But like, if they're good with it, I guess that's them. They do have a different culture, though.
Yeah, because I don't think China is trying to pretend they're not authoritarian. Because if they're trying to pretend they're doing a terrible job,
they're not.
Yeah, so it's about how much you actually agree with them.
True.